So talking about identity, and in the Lusophone context, in the Indian context, first of all, there is a civilizational awakening that is happening. In fact, between 2022 and 2025, we had something very unique that happened. It was coincidental. 4 countries hosted the G20 successively. Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa. And all 4 of them, apart from the fact that they are emerging economies and they are powerhouses in their own right, rising powers of global south, what brings them together is each one of them has a certain unique colonial and decolonialized identity. And each one of them has a civilizational past and a civilizational awakening that is now coming to bear. And in fact, a project has been put together, which is going to be launched in Fudan in November in Shanghai, and we're going for that, presenting a paper, which is about how developing countries in the global south can actually bring forth positive elements of their identity and also bring stories of what exactly happened during the colonial period, so that people need to understand the manner in which these atrocities happened. If you look at Goa, what has been most unique in the Lusophone context is that Goa endured Portuguese colonization for the longest period, 451 years. And none of the other colonies endured it for that long. But it's not just the period, right? It's also what happened during that period. However, what is unique about Goa, and when I talk about this in many other parts of the world, including particularly in Brazil, and they don't always recognize this, is that the only place where the entire community was not converted or the dominant culture at that time was not exterminated was Goa. You look at Timor-Leste, which is East Timor, now called Timor-Leste, they totally have no sense of what their identity used to be. It's a very confused thought. You look at Brazil, they do recognize that they had a nativist culture before the Portuguese came. They are aware of all that happened, but they're not able to relate to that past. And I'll give you an example without naming anybody. The Brazilian Consul General in Mumbai many years ago, she came to Goa University to meet the then Vice Chancellor. And we were in a conversation, a courtesy call, and she came basically to explore India-Brazil ties across all lengths and breadths. And constantly the Vice Chancellor at that time kept telling her about how we are connected through Portugal. She felt very disquieted, disconcerted, but like a good diplomat, obviously don't lose your cool. Somebody else would have lost his cool and said certain things. But she was squirming. And he didn't even take that message. He continued to say for everything that she said, India and Brazil. Portugal as a nation. Now, Portugal is not an enemy country to anybody. Nobody declared that. But the very fact that somebody in Goa, and very much who knows Goa's history, was using Portugal as a bridge between India and Brazil tells us the way in which our mindsets have got conditioned. So one of the important areas for the Center for Colonial Studies is going to be, without showing any kind of animus or adversarialness, which we don't need today, we don't need background, is to be able to put this whole idea into a proper context of why is it that the Goa experience was unique. And I, for one, believe we haven't taken up the Goa colonial project seriously enough. The VIF, I talked to Dr. Arvind Gupta from time to time, and they are very open to this idea of taking up those projects which have remained nondescript or obscure from attention. When we talk of colonization, it's always the British and to some extent the French, hardly anybody talks about it. Now, if you look at what exactly happened here, there is also a uniqueness because it's a very complex layer of colonial impact on Goa. So we know that there were some of the worst atrocities which were done, which have been documented very well. At the same time, we also see that language was understood so very differently. Today, when we look at language as a component, for example, India-China, one of the first things, and this is unfortunate, one of the first things we do whenever we get into a conflict situation with China is stop studying Mandarin. In fact, it is unfortunate that government also comes and says the first thing. I mean, the border issue has nothing to do with language, right? But the first thing we say is stop teaching Mandarin. Now, what has the language got to do with your bilateral relations? In fact, it's the other way around. If you want to better understand strategic context, you must know the language and know it well enough. You must invest in languages. I know for a fact the Chinese are investing, and I've seen people investing in scholarship in vernacular Indian languages. I have met a Chinese scholar who speaks Marathi as good as a Maharashtrian speaker, understanding the strategic importance of language. So, the point I'm trying to make here is, even in those times, language was a very interesting dichotomy. While language was also a language of oppression, we also know that some of the best Portuguese was spoken by was not necessarily spoken by the Catholics, it was spoken by the Hindus. And in many parts of our extended families, even my older generation, they would speak such fluent Portuguese. So language is not just a method of oppression. Language is also a method for you to be able to push back against oppression. But we must also understand that in today's world, when we talk of colonization, decolonization, understanding civilization history, in every civilization history you have, various elements of resistance against colonization. You have selective assimilation, and then you have a certain what is called as hybridization. And all of this has existed in Goa from different points of time. So if you look at, for example, the code, when it comes to your own family code, you are still remaining true to your religious adherence. And then when it comes to a commercial code, we have been following the Portuguese law. So that element where you assimilate, you hybridize, at the same time you hold on very firmly to what is your innate theological core. I think that is something that needs to be understood. So my suggestion here would be that without creating any animus, we take this initiative forward as an intellectual exercise, as a public information and dissemination exercise, and we weave this into what I was just now saying of stage, into what we call the Indian knowledge system. To grow the understanding of what is an Indian knowledge system, what is the Indian statecraft, what is Indian lived experience, what is the Goan lived experience like, and bring that into these studies, which will make these studies not about setting scores or getting into negativity, but actually showing the best elements of what you have. Thank you very
much. I think was great context setting, especially in terms of what approach we should take, the borders we should maintain when we take that approach, and a lot of threads for us to draw into the future work of the center. I now request Dr. Sandeep Kumar to share his speech and thoughts.
We'll listen to it. You have a presentation?
No, yes.
Distinguished on the dais and other dignitaries gathered for the inauguration of Center for Colonial Studies and Indian Culture. So I need an hour in this hour. So this is August. Some 15 days back, we have celebrated our Independence Day. Indian Independence Day. For Goa, it is a different day. I think 9 December. 19 December 1961 was Goa's celebration. So when we discuss about the independence and the freedom, what we need about it. We need to think about it. Was it a real freedom from the past? The past experience of colonialism? If we think in that terms, in that perspective, what we got is merely a kind of physical independence. Mentally, still we are colonized. We are not free. We haven't tried to come out of the colonial experience or colonial narratives. Still we are living in a colonial narrative and colonial experience. In our childhood, I don't know about all of you, but you would have heard about Columbus discovered America, right? Have you heard this statement? Columbus discovered America. Okay. And European came to this part of the world for trade in search of spices. Am I right? Is it a true statement? Is it correct? What do we think? Is it correct? Is it correct? Really? Okay. So, when Columbus reached America, was America empty? He was mentioning about the Latin America. Okay. There was flourishing people. Multiple civilizations were there. The Mayans were there, Incas were there, Aztecs were there. Multiple civilizations were there. All of those civilizations were raised to the ground. Nothing is there now. They forgot about their past. Even now they can't express their old things. Even now the narratives are built and propagated to suppress their identity. I don't know whether you have seen a movie named Apocalypse by Netflix. The content of that movie was only to negatively portray the indigenous community, the Mayan community. Okay, so this is our experience. And right now we know that Columbus was not the person who discovered America. We can say that he was the first non-European to arrive in Americas. Not the because we don't know prior to that any European visited America or not. Therefore, we can say that he is the first non-European or recorded European visited Americas. Same as the Europeans came to this part of the world for trade. If that statement is true, then what was doctrine of discovery? You know what is doctrine of discovery? There is something called a doctrine of discovery. A series of papal bulls issued in between 1452 almost 1600. Series of papal bulls were issued. And the initial papal bulls were in favor of Portugal and Spain. And one papal bull of 1494, which divided world into two parts, west and east. The western part given to Spain and the eastern part given to Portugal by the Pope Alexander VI. Okay. So this is what happened. And what were those papal bulls? That papal bull give an authority, moral authority or moral sanction to conquer, subjugate, confiscate, convert and kill the indigenous people or the non-Christians across the globe. And that was the real thing they did with sanction of the papal bull. They went and conquered distant lands, even in America, India, or China or Japan, wherever they went, they tried to subjugate, conquer, subjugate, enslave, confiscate, convert, and kill people. They did that. So this was an instrument, these papal bulls were an instrument to do such inhuman things. And if that was the case, then what is this narrative of European coming to trade? Is it true? We need to think about it. Because even today, in our textbooks, we are reading that Europeans came for trade and they have gained such as spices. This is a wrong narrative repeatedly taught us. Brainwashes. And they are continually conceived this part of doctrine of discovery. Even Roman Catholic Church 2 years back withdrew the doctrine of discovery. They say we are now acknowledging the doctrine of discovery. But we are not discussing in our universities, in our intellectual circles, we are not discussing about what is doctrine of discovery. And even in Goa, we are not discussing about it. I was a victim of colonization. We are not discussing. And one more thing, where it all started, we need to think about that also. It all started with a phenomenon called crusades. How many of you have heard about crusades? Maybe almost all of you have heard about crusades. Okay. What was the reason for crusade? So mostly the answer would be to liberate the Jerusalem or the birthplace of Jesus from the infidels or Muslims. This is an answer, standard answer or standard narrative given to us in historical narratives. But there was not only one crusade, there were multiple crusades. And crusades were not only to Jerusalem or Levant. There were crusades within Europe, within France. There were crusades to Parties, the northern Europe. There were crusades to Iberian Peninsula against Turks in the Mediterranean. There were different crusading orders, like initially the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights who went after the pagans of Baltic and annihilated them, annihilated their language, their race, and they were completely wiped out. In Prussia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, all these countries. This is what happened. Sanctioned by the Catholic Church. So, those crusading orders of initial stage and the later crusading orders, like Order of the Santiago and Order of the Christ, two crusading orders, which has very much relevance with Goa, who was Vasco da Gama. Do you know? He was a crusading order member of a crusading order. Okay. He was a member of, not only he, his father also was a member of a crusading order named Order of the Santiago. And the Portuguese king was a Grand Master of the crusading order named Order of the Christ. And what happened to Goa, or this part of the world, was an extension of crusade. Nothing else. It was an extension of crusade happened in Europe. The same spirit, the same monks, the same church, they decided to unleash the religious power into this part of the world or rest of the world. And such crusading crusaders come to this area and try to subjugate the people of this part of the world. We know, based on the doctrine of discovery or the contract signed between Portugal and Spain in 1494, Treaty of Tordesillas, under the aegis of Pope, the Portuguese came to this country in 1498, Vasco da Gama. Initially, he reached Kochi, Calicut, then went back. Again, he came to, again, next time, Cabral came. With Cabral, missionaries also came. Then came Marshall and Almeida. Marshall and Almeida tried to capture Calicut. deposed somebody, but they failed miserably. They realized that they can't do a military victory over Calicut. So they changed their mind. Next came Albuquerque. Albuquerque established himself in Goa in 1510. That was the beginning of Portuguese colonization in Goa. He deposed another foreigner called Adil Shah and established himself in Goa. What followed was very good persecution. All the temples of this land was raised. Not only in Goa, in the coastal areas. They looted temples, killed people, subjugated people, enslaved people, converted them possibly. Those who were not ready to convert, they flee. They snatched babies from the bosom of mothers. Even infants were snatched. They abducted kids and sent them to missionary boarding schools to make them good Catholics or good Catholic priests. They unleashed terror in this land. They killed men and transferred their women to Portuguese sailors. Literally, all the men were cut down and their women were transferred to the Portuguese sailors as gift. They can interbreed with them and they can produce more children and they will become the future Catholics. So this was the strategy they adopted in Goa. Time passed. Few people, for example, Francis Xavier, is called as a saint. He came to Goa as a Jesuit missionary from Europe. He was one of the founding members of an order called the Society of Jesus, along with Ignatius Loyola. He came to this part of the country, this part of the world, with aim to Christianization. His sole aim was complete Christianization of this whole area of Asia or India. So he felt that Goans are not morally up to the mark. They are indulging in some kind of anti-Christian activities. So he wrote to the King of Portugal that we need some remedies, we need some instruments to correct this moral turpitude, moral degradation of the society in this part of the country. So he requested for an instrument called Inquisition. He was the first person to argue for Inquisition, institution of Inquisition in India. He was not a lesser man, like the medieval monks, the medieval knights who unleashed terror in Europe and Levant to Christianize, to subjugate the pagans, Jews, Muslims, and even the heretics among the Christians. He was a follower of such monks. He too adopted same tactics. He was using military and manipulation to convert people, to subjugate people, to enslave people, to torture and do extortion. In his letters, it is clear he was advocating torture for extortion or collecting taxes for the college established by the Catholic Church or the Jesuit order. If you read his letters, we will understand what kind of person he was. Was he a saint or a warrior monk? we need to judge from his letters, not from the narratives. Narratives are glossy. Narratives are very good to what for a general understanding. But if you go to the letters written by none other than Francis Xavier and published by the Jesuit order or the Jesuit missionaries or others, you will understand what kind of a person he was. He advocated all kind of terror to convert people. He was trying to create animosity between brother and brother, brother versus brother. He was trying to create animosity and problems between one king to another, to exploit that situation and convert people, to get a foothold in the southern coast of India. He challenged the sovereignty of this country, the sovereignty of kings of this country. We need to understand that it was changing religion was not simply conversion from one religion to another religion. It was the meaning of the conversion to one religion to another religion, that too from Hindu to Christian, was the change of allegiance. Your sovereign will change. Your allegiance will change. You are no more the citizen or subject of your own country, but you are a subject of a foreign king, a foreign country. That was the context. So the Christians, the Jesuits, the missionaries, and the Portuguese argued in the same way that whosoever become Christians, converted to Christianity, naturally or immediately they will become the subject of Portugal. What kind of system it was? You just need to imagine. Just imagine you are living in Kochi, somewhere in Kochi, or somewhere in Kanyakumari, on Thoothukudi. The moment you convert your religion, you lose your this thing, or you become your king become nothing to you, and you become subject of Portuguese king. So this kind of situation was created in this country, and still it is continuing. There is a problem of kind of dual citizenship. So we need to understand these kind of intricacies or situation existed in this country. So they introduced an instrument called the Inquisition to try and convict people. What kind of people? Not someone who has done some great crime, like murder or something. If clergy feels that someone is not up to the mark, or they are not following the Christianity according to their belief or their tradition, then he will become a target. He will get arrested, brought to the inquisitor, and tried and convicted. Anyone clergy feels that he is not up to the mark, he will be arrested. Not only Hindus, the newly converted Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, even the Protestants. Anyone, they can be arrested and brought into Goa. Goa was not, don't think that the Inquisition in Goa was just only for Goans. It was not. The Inquisition court in Goa was for Asia. It was an Asian center for Inquisition. More than 16,000 to 20,000 people were tried in Goa for the religious reasons. Nearly 2,000 people, according to the courts. This is not my number. And barbaric punishments were given to such people, like burning on stake. You would have familiar with the term called burning and life at stake. Okay, it is nothing but burning people life at stake. Flaying, whipping, all kinds of barbaric punishments were unleashed over the innocent victims of Inquisition. This was the situation. Just imagine. They have no other goal. The victims, the accused, he can't rely on an advocate to argue on behalf of him. He will be in prison, chained, and accommodated in some filthy jails, then brought in front of the inquisitor, and he will be tortured to confess the crime which he would not have committed. So such barbaric instruments were used in the Inquisition court. So we need to understand such kind of situation. How people terrorize and people flee from this land for life to save their family, save their children. Even the Christians, you just interact with the Mangalore Christians, Goan Christians, Colonial Christians lives in Mangalore, or the Goemkar living in Kochi, calibrate for Mangalore, Goemkar community, Goan community. They will tell their experience. Not only the Christians, the Jews also underwent such barbaric treatment. You know, in Kochi, I was interacting with one of the lady professors recently. She is a Christian, and she told me that when this, have you heard about Synod of Diamond? Anyone? There was something called the Synod of Diamond. The Portuguese Archbishop of Goa, Alexis Mencias, he came to Kerala to convert the traditional Christians of Kerala coast, they call themselves as Thomas Christians, to Latin Christianity. So he convened a synod of the bishops and all the clergy, and he proclaimed that, pronounced that hereafter this local Christians, the traditional Christians, they will not observe the old practices or the old traditions. They will follow the Latin rites hereafter. Okay, and he asked to burn all their literature, to persecute those who oppose the decision of the synod. So, like according to his instruction, the Portuguese soldiers and other people, the clergy of Latin Church, Jesuit and all, they burned almost all the literature of the traditional Christians in Kerala. And watching this horror of burning their literature, many people, they are known as Katanas in Kerala, the old priests of the Saint Thomas traditions, they died with broken heart. So a lady professor belonging to Christian faith told me some few months back. So this is the experience of people across the southern part of India. Such was the barbarity unleashed over the people of this land. So we need to understand this kind of situation existed in this country under Padrao. What is Padrao? Padrao is an arrangement between the Catholic Church and the Portuguese King in according to which the king will appoint the bishops and local churchmen. He will construct the churches. He will fund the churches and he will fund the conversion also. And he will send the army, the military, to convert people. Conversion was not by convincing. Conversion was by using force. Now people are talking about tolerance. We need to understand how intolerant they were. What kind of torture and methods they have used to convert people. We are living in an era of democracy and human rights. Then there was no rights. There was no democracy. There was no human rights. So they used brutal force to convert people, to capture them as slaves, the people, indigenous people as slaves. They confiscated their land, they confiscated their temples and other places of worship. They used those land to fund the seminaries, to train more priests, the local priests. Even the local priests were not given the status of the foreign priests. They see the local priests as inferior. They regarded the local priests, the newly created local priests, as inferior to the Portuguese or the European priests. They looked in a suspicion. They were never treated them as equals. And now they are talking about equality. Just imagine some 400, 500 years what they were doing. We need to understand this kind of history, what they were doing. We are not talking about a religion or the laity people are believing. So what they did to the laity also, the common people, they were also treated in same mistake. Only those who enjoyed was the clergy with the foreign origin. The Portuguese, Spanish or Italian clergy, or the German or English clergy, they enjoyed. Particularly the Portuguese clergy or the Italian clergy, they enjoyed. They were the superiors. All others were treated as second-grade citizens, as subjects. This was the situation because it was given that treatment was mentioned in the doctrine of discovery. Except the Europeans, European Catholic Christians, all others are second-grade. They have no right to exist. If they convert, they can leave. If they don't convert, they need to be annihilated. This was the situation. You read any literature. You read literature of Europe. You read literature about Latin America. You read literature about Americas. You read literature about Japan. You will get this information. So, I just want to tell only few things in this context. That what happened in the past is past. We all know, and we need to coexist. There is no doubt. But there is a saying in English that eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. Okay. If you are not understanding your history properly, if you are not reading your history properly, if you don't know your history properly, that history may repeat. This kind of situation may reoccur. It will come back to hunt you down. So therefore you need to be vigilant about your history, your past, what happened to you in the past. That is the reason of reading history. That is the reason, the main reason behind reading history is to understand our past, what happened to us, what we did, what others did to us. We need to know so that we can avoid the kind of mistakes we have done or our forefathers done, because of which we lost our freedom. We become subjects. We got enslaved. We lost our freedom to practice our traditions, to release our culture. A mental block was created. We lost the real feeling of what we are. What is our self? We have our selfhood. We need to understand our selfhood and we need to grow on our selfhood. We need to realize what is our self, what we were and what we are. Without that feeling, we can't march towards in this era also. Because the situation in and around us is becoming more vicious, more polarized. Professor was talking about identity, and identity is politics is emerging across the globe. And people are fighting in the name of identities. Some time back, a professor wrote a piece about the clash of civilizations. That clash of civilization is already started. We don't know what is going to happen in the future. But we need to be very vigilant about what happened to us and what is going to happen. If we are not properly aware, properly studying about the past, the history will repeat, as I told earlier. So we need to avoid that. So therefore, whenever people try to glorify the past of the colonial experience, the colonial people, the colonial rulers or colonial supporters of the colonial rulers, we need to be very cautious. We need to question such glorification. We should tell those people that don't glorify such divisive icons. Such incidents, this glorification will cause human fallibility in future. You just imagine what happened to the Jews in Germany. We know about Holocaust. What followed after Holocaust? The German people themselves and the world community across, they decided to avoid such Holocaust, and they taught in the universities that what kind of cruelties perpetuated by human beings against one particular community in the name of their origin or their belief system. So they created literature and taught in the universities to avoid reoccurrence of such incidents in the future. In the same way, here in Goa also and here in India also, we need to teach the real history to the students and to the communities about the colonial past, what the colonial forces did to us, how they eradicated our culture, our places of worship, how they unleashed cruelty. We need to teach the young generation. We need to teach the communities so that we can avoid the reoccurrence of such incidents. And I have a message to the Christian community also, the laity, the common people. You just imagine what happened to your forefathers. Your forefathers would have, your grandmothers or great grandmothers, they would have forcibly converted to Christianity. Their husbands would have killed, forcibly given to Portuguese sailors to interpret. What kind of sufferings through which those ladies would have gone? What happened to those infants? They were snatched from the bosom of their mothers. What kind of sufferings that hits those who are abducted from the villages, houses, and sent to the orphanages or the seminaries? Experience. Among them, your forefathers also have been there. Just imagine their suffering, their experience. This is what happened to this part of the country. This is what happened to the people of this country under foreign subjugation, colonized era. This is what the church, the Latin imperialist, done to our people. So therefore, trying to understand it from our own perspective, our own cultural perspective, and tell the people, those who are glorifying this kind of colonization and colonial icon, that no more glorification. We need to teach the experience in our education institutions and the institutions like Center for Colonial Studies and Indian Culture will benefit or create a platform to study such experience of the native people and such experience across the world to teach or to provide materials or content to the universities and the institutions in this part of the world. And I have one more appeal or a request to the Portugal and the Catholic Church. Please apologize. Please apologize. The crimes you have done against humanity in this part of the world. What you did, what you have unleashed in this part of the country is nothing but a crime against humanity. You have violated all kinds of human rights in this country. You need to apologize for those crimes you have committed in this land, so that we can coexist. Be tolerant. No more glorification. We need to coexist. Therefore, you need to apologize. You have said, the Catholic Church has said that they are not for doctrine of discovery. They repent on what they have done in case of slavery or in the case of slavery. They say that we are not accepting the history of slavery. Okay, good. When you come to this point also, please apologize. Because numerous victims in their graves are waiting for justice. They are the victims. If you glorify the predators, the victims will suffer in their graves. So, in the name of numerous victims of cruelty, I request the Portugal and the Catholic Church to apologize to the victims of this land and to stop the glorification of colonial icons and colonial events. Thank you very much.
pretty thought-provoking to run through the journey and colonial history of 500 years. I think becoming Indian is still an unfinished business in terms of understanding who we are and our identity. So let us walk that path. I now request Professor Manoj Kamath to guide us on what should be the conclusion outline of this center, placing before us some vision and activities to shape the works of the center.
Suprabhat and wishes of the World Sanskrit Day. Friends, it was a very insightful session. We heard that Dr. Sandeep Kumar indicated us about the entire doctrine of colonization. The very starting points that he made was that conquering for the spice trade or conquering the world against the Ottoman Empire, our quest for new maritime routes were only some excuses against the real agenda of the church, the real agenda of the European nations, primarily Spain and Portugal. The doctrine of colonialization rested in the document of doctrine of changing the identities, doctrine of changing the civilizations, and a unified unpluralistic path. That unpluralistic path was against the idea of acceptance of other religions, against the idea of acceptance of other religions, against the idea of tolerance, and against the idea of unified civilization. India has not been an exception. We have seen other Latin American countries, we have seen Lusophone countries bearing the brunt, but as you rightly pointed out, there cannot be any other center or any other regional lands other than Goa, other than South India, where we face the brunt for centuries. It was not only an onslaught of 451 years in the state of Goa or in the land of Goemkar, but it was an onslaught against our own identity, against our own value system, against our own civilization, against our own philosophies of life which accepted everyone around us. The brunt of what we faced, where there was a mass exodus of people, exodus of intellectual activity, exodus of our religious beliefs, exodus of our gods. There is now well documented in the modern post-colonialized history. But one thing is certain. No established institution till date talking about historical research, talking about colonialization studies, pre-colonial history, talked about the other side of history. Histories always write narratives of the winners. Whether they were winners or not, they were able to document their side of history. The basic idea of Center for Colonial Studies and Indian Culture is not to talk about their side and our side, but to talk about the real historical narrative as a lived experience of individuals. Unless there is a proper documentation, unless there is proper dissemination of our own experiences, of our own people across the periods before colonialization, during the colonial era and post-colonial era, the historical documentation sense be complete. Hence the reason for Center for Colonial Studies and Indian Culture. So we talk about Indian culture. My basic interest is to talk about our culture of our regional lands. Because there cannot be any other state other than Goa which faced some kind of an onslaught like how we faced, our forefathers have faced. As I said, it was not only about land, it was not only about religion, but it was about individual identity. And then the fight for identity starts only when we have proper documentation, we have proper narrative setting based on our individual experiences. Imagine if the book on Goa Inquisition Code, other than written by Anantalal had not been there, you would have heard only one side of the story. That Inquisition, the modern narrative is totally different. That Inquisition was not against you, not against natives, but it was only against Catholic people. That's a thing. The Inquisition was not about Hindus, but Inquisition was only on Catholics. That is another thing. They never talked about the neo-Catholics, which were forcefully converted and what under that Belford, only under the brand of the sword. So what is it that what we want to share? What about the institutional system and our belief system which persisted even after this 451 years of modified experiences? What about the new idea assimilation what we did? And our survival of our language, our religions, our gods, and our philosophy in spite of all that happened, that could survive because of the strong belief system and our perseverance, which we need to bring forth. So, according to me and my suggestions for this particular sector, is not only to talk about the ideological system, not only to talk about or glorify our Quranic belief systems, but to talk about public historical narratives which were never bought or which has never seen light. What should be the vision? Our vision must be to document and restore the native agency. What happened to our own natives? What happened to our own experiences? Idea is not to set the historical record right, because if you say it will be misunderstood. But I would say this forum should help us to document our own experiences the way we feel is right. It could be considered as, anti-institutional for those who only believed in a particular set of theory. But then in a pluralistic society where multiple theories do exist, and as what Dr. Sandeep Kumar said, that if coexistence is necessary, admission of historical facts becomes a prerequisite for such kind of coexistence. So what we need to do, we need to build some kind of well-grounded, citable work that will outcast any single institutional movement. And when I talk about institutional movements in Goa, we have seen it is only a religious institution-backed settings which has set one-sided narrative. Our aim is not to question that, but our aim is to further it by talking about the diverse perspectives or our nativist viewpoints. And how it can be done? Not by flattening a particular history, but by bringing in our own perspectives on history. So, if in Goa today there is a split between the loyalist or the philosophical view and the modern post or colonialization kind of a view, we need to set the currents right, even without trying to flatten your viewpoint. How it can be done? It needs to be done first, because if the current history is one-sided, we need to give it a pluralistic view. So, pluralism safeguarding should be one of the important benchmarks of this society. Why? Because we are not trying to chamber or silo a particular viewpoint of history. We don't need to build it from a charter, but build it as a character where every opinion would come. So therefore, we will need to recover, preserve and translate primary source material. One good example particularly is the letters written by all those back to their homelands, talking about their adventures. So we need to understand what was your adventures. What were the historical accords which you considered as your priorities? Because that would set up right whether you came here for trade, whether you came here only for land, or there was another purpose for your existence. Second, we will need to support original scholarships which does not have predetermined conclusions. The current predetermined conclusions which are already set, they are already happy with our faith. They are not telling you. You may be happy in whatever philosophical mindsets you may have. But then, let us also see under which conditions you are forced to accept a particular philosophy where now you came to me. If that needs to be said, then we are not setting right or bringing you in the mainstream. That's left to you. That's not my agenda or our agenda. So for this we have to build a very credible kind of a system, not just a database, credible set of a record which will help the future generations to take their own decisions. Third, make our scholarships acceptable in the peer medium. Just writing experiences will not help until your research or until your documentation is well accepted. Now for well acceptance, we require primary evidence and collaboration of primary evidence which we need to build. So the exact legitimacy of this particular center, what we are thinking of, would build on confirming the past narratives, questioning the past narratives with evidence, and those narratives which rest on pure experiences and documentation. So in the days to come, so before we launch even our first national seminar, we plan to contact like-minded individuals who are ready to research, listen, document, search with an open, not with a preconceived mindset that whatever exists on paper is only right. Because we know who has created that document and where it is stored so that you only access those documents. Second, create a new record where every voice would count. Third, create a platform for sustenance of our idea. With this, I must thank you, Professor Dr. Sandeep Kumar. Your work is quite commendable in the place where you sit. Because where only a left-minded or opposed to Indian culture, Indian language, or Indian philosophy is a norm, people like you stand out in the crowd, establishing our own identity. Though we don't follow your language, we follow your spirit. Though we don't understand you in the language in which you prefer to write, we have seen the translations, we have seen the Indian scripts, we have seen the English translations of your work. And at every point of time when there is a louder opposition voice in that state where you come from, every single word which you have documented, every single word which you have narrated before the media has helped the people around you to shape their opinions. The change is yet to be seen in places like Kerala. But then we have seen there are signals to change. We have seen things are changing in the neighboring Tamil Nadu. And it is not too long when even lands of Malaya will also be in the mainstream because of ideas like that of yours. I must thank you for giving us an opportunity to hear a great scholar who has done considerable research in this particular doctrine, challenging the original doctrine of conquest for land or conquest for trade. Thank you also for explaining that the exodus of people and their history documentation would help us in order to preserve what can go wrong. Third and very important thing, which he narrated and then he ended his beautiful narration, is for all those reasons which have been your crusade against humanity. You need to apologize. And if you believe in that particular faith and philosophy where apology matters, you need to live like that. So now in next 1 month period, we want to reach out only to our like-minded people. We see quite a good friends of ours from history, from economics, from politics, from spirituality to company. We are opposed to different ideas, but then we want to test the existing values. We are open to different versions of truth, but then the real version of truth should come through collaborative kind of evidence. We are open for a divergent viewpoint, which is already in mainstream. But at the same time, we also look for new pieces of evidence. Most of them we will have to create, document, and collaborate, for which we request your full-fledged support, intellectual support, social support, strategic and tactical support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Quite a few pertinent points, and it was almost like an action plan unfolding for us on how to stitch together different initiatives, integrate with people from different walks of life, to draw a cause. I think it was a very clear articulation also in terms of what the center should pursue and not do as well. So thank you very much for your guidance. As we draw close to this launch event, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude, first of all, to our distinguished panelists, Dr. Rajesh Purohit, Sandeep Kumar, Dr. Sandeep Kumar, and Professor Mohan Kamath, for their time, their insights, and their generosity in being a part of this very important beginning. Our thanks also go out to the research scholars, students, journalists, and citizens who are present here today, who have come together to learn, share, and support the Center for Colonial Studies and Indian Culture. It is your presence and engagement that gives us real meaning to occasions like this. Thank you all once again for being here. With this, we probably not just mark the launch of the center, but the beginning of shared journeys, in research, in dialogue, and in cultural understanding that we will take together in the months to come. So, thank you once again for being here, being a part of this initiative. We have the IP served in about 5 minutes, so I request you to be present here to mingle and walk around, know each other. I think people from different institutions, from different towns in Goa have come in, so let us please have interactions with each other and then discuss.
Can we have a group photograph?
Of course. Dear
The voice for Goem.